Immigration is out of control, but that's not really a surprise. Immigration has been out of control in the United States for a very long time, and that's not really an accident. That's an active decision made by our ruling elites. However, it is coming to the top of mind for a lot of people because they're seeing images like this one, trains full of illegal immigrants heading towards the southern border of the United States, which is essentially an open border at this point. These people expect to get in as long as they're persistent, and they're very right to expect that. A lot of people understand that the Biden administration is enabling this, and they're starting to get fed up about it. It's kind of funny, though, because I'm seeing the way that people talk about this, and I don't think they understand an essential element of the immigration situation. I saw somebody on Twitter whose commentary I usually like, but she was saying, well, why won't open borders advocates just have an honest debate about this? Why won't they just tell the truth? Why are they always using all these misleading arguments? And I don't think she understands the purpose of this interaction. If you think that politics works kind of this way that you're taught, where everybody just gets together and there's this marketplace of ideas and we all make our arguments and the best arguments win the day and they convince people and win everyone over and then your policy is put into place, then yes, this back and forth between open borders advocates and people who want border security, it can be kind of confusing, right? Because a lot of people who are talking about open borders will say that there's no real cost, there's no real downside. These people, it's just a bunch of slogans really at the end of the day. No human is illegal, that kind of stuff. There's obviously real and serious consequences to having an open border, but these people really don't care. And again, that's very confusing to people who want to have a productive argument. They're like, well, why won't these people just sit down and talk about this? Obviously, they're being duplicitous. Obviously, their arguments are bad. And eventually, that has to have a cost, right? Eventually, the people who are listening to the debate, the voters, they're going to go to the polls and they're going to respond to the fact that these people don't have good arguments. They're going to lose respect in the public eye. Don't they realize the consequences of this? Don't they want to get together and have a real substantive argument and have their minds changed? And the answer is, of course, no. They have no interest in that because they don't really need to have a debate with you. Something that a lot of people on the right, a lot of people who are for immigration restriction don't understand is the left doesn't need to have a debate at all, really, about immigration. Because the great thing is, all they have to do is run out the clock. See, the purpose of the current immigration policy, there are many benefits for the left, but one of the main benefits is changing the electoral map permanently, changing the demographics, changing the people who are in the country, changing their political leanings, and securing a permanent electoral majority. Again, this isn't something that you have to be some conspiracy theorist about. This is literally something that leftists just say out loud all the time. They brag about it, they boast about it, there are headlines about it. Politicians get on major news programs or radio shows and they talk about how this is happening. So they understand what's happening here. They know that if they bring enough people into the country, there is a likelihood that those people will dilute the votes of the people who are already here, who are attached to the institutions and traditions and culture of the existing United States, the kind of thing that the Democrats are against. And these people are more likely to vote in their favor. Now, to be clear, not everybody coming over the border is a monolith. A lot of people think, of course, that it's a bunch of Hispanic people coming into the United States. And that's, of course, true to some extent, but it's not the way it used to be. The southern border is so open at this point that it's not just people coming from countries close to the southern border of the United States. It's not just people coming from Mexico or Venezuela or Guatemala anymore. You now have people coming from all around the world. You have Ukrainians, you have Russians, you have Africans, you have all kinds of people who want to come to the United States, and they just come to the southern border because they know it's open. So you don't have just one demographic coming through the border at this point. Though, to be fair, again, it is still majority Hispanic at this point. However, when they come into the United States, eventually there will be a move towards amnesty. The left is constantly pushing for this. They're constantly trying to leverage this. It's gonna happen. And even if it doesn't happen right away, even if amnesty isn't given, all these people don't magically turn into legal voters, more of them will get their citizenship. More of them are likely to come in and get some form of suffrage, some form of voting rights through one method or another, both locally and at the national level. And when they do that, they're far more likely to vote Democrat. Now, again, that's not necessarily always true. There are plenty of Latino Republicans. There are strong groups that do vote conservative in that demographic. There are groups that do vote Republican, and over time, it does seem like there can be a shift. We saw that in Florida with the reelection of Ron DeSantis. He won among Hispanics by a good bit, even in places like Miami-Dade, which are notoriously blue, notoriously left. And so this means that over time you can see shifts. So the idea that everyone coming across the border will just automatically vote Democrat isn't true. However, the Democrats are perfectly aware that still the majority of recently arrived immigrants do vote Democrat. That's just the way it is, even if they have some kind of religious disagreement with the left, even if they don't like some of the progressive policies that are happening. People who have recently arrived tend to vote for the people who will provide them with the most programs, who they see as being, sheltering certain civil rights for them, that kind of thing. And so it is far more likely that they will vote left wing when they come in. And so even though you're still going to have plenty of people who will come in and vote conservative, who will be more right wing, overall, you are going to shift the balance of the country to the left. You're also going to mix up all of the cultures that exist because mass immigration always impacts the cultures in areas, which is again going to break up any of those traditional voting blocks that tend to be more Republican. This is a specific electoral strategy for the left. And again, they have not really been very cagey about that. They just call you racist if you notice, but they celebrate it all the time. So it's that Michael Anton celebration parallax, right? It's not happening, but actually it turns out it's a really good thing that it was always happening the whole time. If you notice it and you praise it, then you can notice it. But if you notice it and say it's a bad thing, then actually it wasn't happening and you're a racist and you're a conspiracy theorist. So this is the game the left has played for a very long time. But of course, the thing for the left is that time is on their side. If they can avoid any kind of immigration reform, if they can avoid any kind of curtailment of what's happening here or any kind of actual security, maybe even deportations, if they can avoid that for long enough, then they lock in the majority, right? They get to go ahead and control the electoral map in perpetuity, and that's their goal. As long as you continue to have a democracy, as long as you continue to have a wide open franchise, and you're going to continue to have a push to make sure that all of these people who have been here eventually for decades get the vote, all that kind of thing, that's going to happen. And when it does, the Democrats are very sure that that's going to leave them in control of the electoral map forever. And that's what they're counting on. So they don't really need to have any specific debate in the short term. They don't need to win arguments. They don't have to worry about the long term impact on their credibility or if they're going to be able to win over certain segments of the United States, because the whole point is to replace the segments that would have a problem with that, right? It's to import new voters to replace the ones that have a problem with them. And if they can just hold on long enough, if they can just run out the clock, then they win by default. Because once they get enough people in, once they shift permanently the electoral reality in the United States, it doesn't really matter if they lost credibility with certain segments of the United States or if they didn't make very good arguments or if they embarrassed themselves in that moment, because at the end of the day, they got enough people into the country who are going to vote for them no matter what. And now they've gone ahead and locked that down. And any consequence that might come from being disingenuous or not having good arguments won't really matter in the long run. That's what they're counting on. That's why Karine Jean-Pierre, she had a reporter actually ask her about the immigration scenario, and she just said, "Oh, we're just moving on," right? She refused to answer any questions about the border. Why would she answer any questions about the border? Things are happening exactly the way that the Democrats want to, right? That they're doing exactly what they want with the border. It's working, it's happening. They don't need to pass any legislation. They don't need to take any action. Inaction is the action, right? That's all they really need to do in order to go ahead and shift things in their favor. So they don't need to engage in what a lot of conservatives think of as the essential battle of politics, because they're winning politics in a very different way. And this is a real problem with conservatives, people on the right. This is a real problem with the GOP. I mean, there's a lot of problems with the GOP, but this is one of them. Only think about winning elections in a classical civics class way, right? I'm sitting in the classroom, someone explains to me the Constitution and three branches of government and how elections work. And that's all they think about is I'm going to have the Lincoln Douglas debates, and that's how I'm going to win in politics. But the Democrats have much better thinking. They're playing 4D chess while you're over there playing checkers, right? They understand they don't need to make these arguments. They just need to shift how votes are counted, right? When it comes to electoral integrity or who can vote by bringing in new voters who are not going to have the attachment to previous issues that they don't want them to. They understand that really making arguments is the least effective way to win in politics. They're thinking way outside the box. They're thinking many elections down the road. They're not just thinking about winning a specific argument right now. And that's why they are so good at this. This is why they are running laps around the Republicans. All right, so I know what you're thinking. Okay, Oren, that's great. Yeah, the arguments don't matter. Traditional politics isn't going to get this done. But what do we do? What can actually be done to keep the Democrats from just running out the clock here? If making arguments in the marketplace of ideas is not going to shift things, then what is the practical action that will actually change what's going on? Well, I do think that there is a good way for the right to think about this. I do think there is a good way for Republicans, the GOP, to take action here. Now, we've already seen some of this from some red states, from some governors. We've seen places like Texas and Arizona start to take some action. So, one of the things that's been happening is that places like Arizona try to build a border wall with shipping containers, right? And then the Biden administration goes to court and they force them to take it down. Same thing with Texas. They're putting out these buoys across the Rio Grande to try to stop people from crossing. They've got kind of this barrier in the water, and that's also supposed to have to come down now due to Biden administration going after it. So the Biden administration again knows what they're doing. They're actively manufacturing this situation. They're going after states that might try to actually do something about what's going on here. We saw border agents, we saw the Border Patrol go out and cut razor wire that Texas put out again to keep migrants from coming in. So the Biden administration is actively facilitating this. They want this to happen. Again, this is not an accident. This is not a mistake. This is not a problem for the left. This is an opportunity that they manufactured. They are making this happen. This is a choice, a policy choice that they are making. It's not some crisis that just sprung up organically out of nowhere. But we do see the Biden administration going after states that are stopping this. And so, what do you need in a scenario like this? Well, it's going to be controversial, but you got to have the guts to do this. We need a governor to just tell these people no. So, when a judge hands down their decision and says, hey, this state's got to go ahead and take down its border wall, or it's got to get rid of this barrier in the water, or it's got to go ahead and remove its razor wire. You really need leadership. You really need a governor. You really need sheriffs and other people who are just willing to say, no, we're just not doing it. We don't care. That's nice that you made your ruling, but now go ahead and enforce it. And that's a scary thing. That's going to be controversial, right? A governor just telling the court no, just telling the administration no, just kind of saying, we don't care what you tell us to do. We have a duty to the people first. We have a duty to the safety of these people first. And if you are not going to do your job as a federal government, I mean, if a federal government has any job at all, it's to protect the borders of their country. That's kind of the amazing thing about our immigration situation, right? The United States and other Western nations, they send their militaries everywhere else. They'll go to Ukraine, they'll go to Afghanistan, they'll go to wherever, right? But the one place they're not allowed to actually work, the one place they're not allowed to actually be deployed, seems to be the border of their own countries. The one thing that no Western army is actually allowed to do is protect their borders of their country. The one thing the militaries were originally designed to do in the first place. And so what you really need is a governor who's saying, look, if the federal government has actively said, we are not going to stop this, we are going to allow these people to come through, we're going to allow all the drugs, all the violence, all the child trafficking, sex trafficking, all this stuff that comes with an open border, along with just a bunch of people who are illegal and have no right to be here, we're going to actively make a decision to allow this to happen. We're going to force it to happen, and we're going to fight against anybody who tries to stop it from happening. In fact, we're even going to announce that we're doing this specifically to change and undermine democracy in the United States. But if anyone tries to stop us, we're going to go get a court order and dismantle whatever they're doing. You just need governors who say no. right? You just need to say, sorry, but you're not allowed to come down here and do any of this. We're not going to remove it. And if you try to send anybody down here to remove it, we're going to turn them away at the border. We're going to say, no, you can't come in the state to do this. Again, that's a scary situation, right? We've had some people like DeSantis pushing back against the federal government and their mandates and the things that they want to make them do. We are seeing him embolden some people. I wish he would do more of that and less trying to run against Trump. But anyway, he's made his decision. I don't need to get lost in the weeds on that. The point is, we've seen him inspire other governors to take action like that. But all of it has been lighter stuff. Once you have a governor who actually says, no, we're going to do your job because you won't do it, we're going to enforce a border that you refuse to enforce. In fact, that you actively keep anyone else from enforcing. We're just going to stop that. And if a court tells us not to do that, we're just going to ignore them. And if you send somebody down here to stop that, we're going to turn them around. That is something that actually challenges sovereignty, right? That puts you in a real situation where you could have something like a constitutional crisis. But at this point, you have to have it, because if you don't do something like that, your constitution isn't going to matter, guys. You can LARP about having a constitution. You can talk about having a border. You can talk about having democracy or rights or having rule of law and due process and all of these nice things. But if your border is constantly open and the regime can just bring in as many new people as it wants, and it can completely change the culture, the demographics, and the voting patterns of the country, the things that will actually control who gets elected and who stays in power, then you don't have any of that stuff. There is no border policy. There is no democracy. There are no real elections. If you're allowing people to fundamentally change everything about the United States, who lives here, who can decide who's in power, who can vote, who can wield authority, who has sovereignty. If you're allowing these people to come and just change all of that on a constant basis through an open border, then nothing else matters. Look, I care a lot about a lot of issues beyond the border. I'm somebody, whenever somebody says, "Oh, the culture war doesn't matter," blah blah blah, I always get angry at them because, like, obviously it does, and this is a real issue. But they are right about one thing: if you don't focus on the border, if you don't stop this, nothing else matters, because this is literally the control of who lives here. It's control of who votes. The Democrats are leaving the border open, and the Democrats are changing the way we vote to make sure that as much voter fraud can happen as possible, right? That is what they are doing right now. They are actively changing the way that elections can occur in the United States, and they're actively changing who will be in the United States and who will be voting, not just in the next election, but many elections down the road. They are actively doing that, and they will announce to your face when when they think they can get away with it, that is their purpose and that is what they're doing, that is their plan. And so if you don't have red state governors step up and say, we are enforcing this border no matter what. We don't care about what the court says. We don't care about what the Biden administration says. This border is closed. We are closing it. If you want to come down here and do anything else, then you, in full view of the American people, better send somebody, because we are going to be here protecting the people we're supposed to, right? That's a challenge that has to happen. And if nobody has the stones to do that, nobody has the courage to do that, if nobody can summon the wherewithal to do that, then none of the other politics matters. Because if you can change the electorate, if you can change the way that voting occurs in the United States, if you can change who's going to be here for generations and the way that they're going to vote, then the idea of having debates and democracy and making arguments and that stuff, none of it matters, right? And so for the Democrats, all they have to do is run out the clock. All they have to do is keep the border open long enough for that permanent change to take place, and then they're good. And it doesn't matter how bad their arguments were. It doesn't matter how bad they discredited themselves. At the end of the day, they'll have the majority they're looking for, and they can control all the things that they want to control. For the Republicans, for the right, for conservatives, for people who don't want this transformation in the United States, don't want the Democrats to have a permanent majority forever, they have to take action. They can't just sit around waiting for hoping that different court orders and different arguments work their ways through and things get fixed. They don't have that option, because every moment, that they leave that border open, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are pouring over that border every month, and they are permanently changing what's happening. We have basically entire states worth of people coming in to the United States, and they will shift the way that this country votes, the way that it chooses leaders for a very long time, for generations and generations. So Republicans have to grow a spine. Red state governors have to grow a spine. You have to stop thinking about how you're going to have the best argument, how you're going to have the best showdown on some news show, how you're going to write the best op-ed, and you have to take action. And action means ignoring people who tell you don't close the border, ignoring people who say you can't do that, and just protecting the people you were elected to protect, and then letting the chips fall where they may.